August 4th, 1964. Somewhere off the coast of North Vietnam, a Navy captain is staring at a sonar screen showing him ghosts. Green blips that might be torpedoes, might just be waves. He cables Washington one word that should have stopped everything. Doubtful. A jumpy, overworked sonar crew, he says. No actual sightings. 3 months later, Congress votes for war anyway. And that captain's doubts get buried under 58,000 American graves. Sir, that's not even close to the worst one on this list. Not even close. From a captain who told his own government the attack never happened, to a president who told the whole world about weapons that were never found, to a telegram that literally offered another country our own land back. This is every president who lied us into a war. And it didn't start with the one you're thinking of. It started 200 years earlier, with a president who had every reason to lie, and didn't. In 1798, John Adams inherited a cabinet that wanted a war, and a navy that was already fighting one without asking Congress. French privateers had been seizing American merchant ships in the Caribbean, and Adams's own Secretary of State, a hardliner named Timothy Pickering, was quietly capturing French vessels and publishing the ugliest diplomatic letters he could find. 'Cause nothing gets a Congress fired up like a good insult in print. Rude. The whole cabinet was Hamilton's cabinet, really, stacked with men who wanted a full declaration of war against France, and Adams knew it. Melvin's already flipping through the file on this one. Nothing yet, Melvin. Keep looking. Here's the twist. In 1799, Adams found out France wanted to talk. A new French foreign minister had reopened the door to negotiations. So Adams did something almost nobody in his own party wanted. He sent a peace delegation to Paris without even telling his cabinet first, 'cause he knew if he asked permission, they'd talk him out of it. Sir, do you understand how much your own party hated you for that? They hated him plenty, but here's the number that matters. 0. 0 formal declarations of war. In 2 years of an undeclared naval conflict historians just call the quasi-war, 'cause it never became a real one. Adams signed a peace deal in September of 1800, right as his own presidency was collapsing under him politically. He killed his own re-election chances to avoid a war his cabinet was begging him to start. Melvin, pull the receipts on that one. Turns out being the guy who says no is not exactly a winning campaign strategy. That's the guy who refused. Now meet the guy who didn't just accept a war. He may have written the invitation before it even happened. On April 25th, 1846, an American patrol rode into a stretch of land both the US and Mexico claimed as their own border, and 11 of them ended up dead. James K. Polk had sent General Zachary Taylor's men right into that disputed zone, knowing exactly how Mexico's garrison across the river would probably react. 'Cause provoking a response was sort of the point. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Polk's own diary, published decades later, shows he was already drafting his war message to Congress days before news of the ambush even reached Washington. 'Cause messages traveled slow back then, and Polk's timeline barely worked out in his favor. His message went to Congress on May 11th, and in it he claimed Mexico had, quote, shed American blood upon the American soil. Sir, blood was shed. Whether it was actually American soil is the 200-year-old argument. Congress signed off anyway, no questions asked. 174 to 14 in the House, 40 to 2 in the Senate. A freshman congressman named Abraham Lincoln spent the next 2 years demanding Polk show him the exact spot where the blood was spilled, 'cause Lincoln, of all people, smelled something off. Historians are still split on whether Polk manufactured the war outright or just seized a lucky excuse, but 13,000 American dead later, mostly from disease, not bullets, It stopped mattering which explanation was more polite. 13,000. Gone. I was there for that one, and let me tell you, nobody in that cabinet room looked surprised when the ambush happened. Nobody. Adams said no to a war his cabinet wanted. Polk built one his own diary practically confesses to. But neither of them had to fake the whole incident. That's the next guy. Melvin. Still no luck on the Adams file? Never mind. Forget it. New case. On February 15, 1898, the battleship USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, and 266 American sailors went down with her. Within days, two newspaper empires were running headlines that had already convicted Spain, 'cause nothing sold papers in 1898 like a good villain. Remember the Maine, T.O. Okay, sir, hang on. We should probably check if that's actually true first. Turns out, maybe not. You've probably heard that one newspaper mogul cabled his illustrator in Cuba, something like, "You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war." Great line. Dramatic line. Historians have gone digging for the actual telegram, and 'cause there's no reliable record it was ever sent, most serious researchers now consider it a myth that just refused to die. What we do know is that a Navy inquiry declared, only weeks after the explosion, that an external mine had sunk the Maine, without anything close to the technical evidence to actually prove it. Fast forward to 1976. Admiral Hyman Rickover, yes, the Rickover, nuclear Navy legend, commissioned a modern forensic review using actual physics instead of 1898 vibes, 'cause somebody, eventually, had to check the math. His conclusion: the explosion most likely came from inside the ship, a coal bunker fire igniting the ammunition magazine. Not a Spanish mine at all. Melvin, pull the receipts. We went to war with a country over an accident, probably, and by the time anyone did the math, we already owned Puerto Rico and Guam. Nearly 3,000 Americans died in that war, most from disease again, not combat. Cuba got an independence with strings attached. And a phrase that may never have actually been said helped launch a war that absolutely was. But the next lie isn't a maybe. It's a telegram Germany itself admitted to sending. And it might be the boldest one on this entire list. On May 7, 1915, a German U-boat torpedoed the British liner Lusitania off the Irish coast. 1,198 people died, 128 of them American. Woodrow Wilson kept the country out of the war anyway, for 2 more years, 'cause he genuinely campaigned on staying out of it. And he meant it. Then, in January of 1917, British codebreakers intercepted something that changed everything. A telegram from Germany's foreign secretary to Mexico. The offer inside it: if Mexico joined Germany against the United States, Germany would help Mexico take back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona once the war was won. Sir, Germany offered to give Mexico back the entire Southwest. In writing. Bold move. Wilson's own cabinet actually wanted to keep the telegram secret at first. Not 'cause they doubted it, but 'cause revealing it would tip off Germany that British intelligence was reading their mail. They released it anyway, on March 1, 1917. And here's the detail that makes it airtight. The German foreign secretary didn't deny it. He confirmed it himself to reporters 2 days later. Congress declared war a month after that. Melvin, pull the receipts. For once, we didn't even need to. Germany did it for us. Over 4 million Americans shipped out. 58,000 of them never came home from combat, and that's before you count the roughly 63,000 more who died from disease and accidents just getting there and back. A telegram written by a man who never denied writing it helped send them. Adams refused a war his cabinet wanted. This next lie didn't come with any confession at all. It came with a fogged-up radar screen and a crew that wanted to believe what they were seeing. On the night of August 4th, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson went on national television and told America that U.S. destroyers carrying out patrols in international waters had just been attacked again off the coast of Vietnam. 3 months later, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution almost unanimously, basically handing the president a blank check for military action without ever declaring war outright. And the slide toward 58,000 American dead in Vietnam had its permission slip. Here's the part you already heard in the opener. 2 nights earlier, on August 2nd, the USS Maddox really had been fired on by North Vietnamese patrol boats. That part's true, no dispute. But the second attack, the one on August 4th that Johnson went on TV about, the one Congress actually voted on? Declassified NSA records, released decades later in 2007, show there almost certainly wasn't one, cause the Maddox's own captain cabled Washington that same night saying his sonar contacts and torpedo reports, quote, seem doubtful. Sir, the man on the boat told them it probably didn't happen that night. In real time. Freak weather, confused radar, a jumpy, exhausted sonar crew. That's what the captain blamed the Phantom attack on, cause dark water and shaky equipment will do that. Johnson's own defense secretary later admitted the intelligence had been misrepresented, but by then it didn't matter. The resolution passed 88-2 in the Senate, unanimous in the House, 88-2. And America was at war based on a night that mostly happened in a sonar operator's imagination. Sir, real talk for a second. Not every segment on this list gets to end with a joke, and this one doesn't either. 58,220 Americans died in Vietnam. 2 million Vietnamese died on both sides. All of that traces back, at least in part, to a vote taken over an attack that a ship's own captain doubted while it was supposedly happening. Adams refused a war. Wilson got handed a confession. This next one didn't even need a real event. A foggy night and a nervous crew did the job by themselves. But we haven't hit the biggest one yet. Not even close. On March 18, 1969, Richard Nixon told the American people on national television, "I have ordered that all United States forces be withdrawn from Cambodia." What he didn't mention, at that exact moment, B-52 bombers were already deep into a bombing campaign over Cambodia that would run for 4 more years, one the public wouldn't find out about until 1971. Sir, he announced a withdrawal from a war he hadn't even admitted to starting. The numbers here are almost too big to picture. By the time the bombing stopped in August of 1973, the U.S. had dropped roughly 2.7 million tons of explosives on Cambodia, more than America dropped on the entirety of Europe during all of World War II, cause Cambodia was neutral, and neutral countries don't get declared wars, they just get secret ones. Internal White House minutes from March of 1969 show Henry Kissinger himself estimating civilian casualties at under 100 people. Historians now put the real toll somewhere between 150,000 and 500,000 Cambodian civilians dead. Cause once you drop that much ordnance on farmland, under 100 was never a serious estimate to begin with. Melvin, pull the receipts. Turns out a war can be a state secret right up until a leaked set of documents makes it front-page news, cause that's exactly what happened when a set of Pentagon files hit the New York Times in 1971. Some historians go further. They say the bombing itself helped push desperate, displaced Cambodian peasants toward the regime that would go on to commit one of the worst genocides of the 20th century. That's disputed. But it's not a fringe theory. Serious scholars of the region argue it too. Nixon lied to the press about a war. The next guy on this list lied to the entire country about a threat, and it's the smallest, silliest entry on this whole list. On October 25, 1983, Ronald Reagan told America that a runway being built on the tiny island of Grenada was, quote, to serve as a way station for Soviet arms and Cuban troops. In reality, it was a tourist airport, designed by a British firm, funded partly by the European Union, under construction for 2 years, 'cause Grenada, it turns out, just really wanted more tourists. Woohoo! Cannonball! Sorry, sir. I got excited. This one's basically a beach invasion. I couldn't help myself. Reagan's own Secretary of Defense admitted afterward that the airport was never a real military threat. They knew it internally the whole time. There were real American medical students on that island, and real instability after a coup. That part wasn't invented. But when a reporter pushed back, Reagan himself finally said on TV, quote, "It wasn't medical students. Let's be truthful about it." Which is a wild thing to say out loud after saying the opposite for a week straight. Since Reagan was apparently fine admitting things after the fact, let me be honest for a second too. If you've made it this far in the list, hitting subscribe costs you a lot less credibility than this entire invasion cost the Pentagon's messaging team. Just saying. 19 Americans died taking an island whose airport, again, was for tourists. It's the smallest entry on this whole list, and it still set the template every president after him would use. Find a scary-sounding foreign threat. Announce it with total confidence. Sort out the truth later. McKinley used the newspapers. Reagan used the Pentagon podium. The next guy used somebody's actual daughter. On December 20th, 1989, George H.W. Bush sent 26,000 American troops into Panama to remove Manuel Noriega, a dictator who, uncomfortably, had been on the CIA's payroll for years before we decided he was the enemy. But it's what happened 8 months later that belongs right next to McKinley's newspaper war. 15 years old. That's how old the girl was who testified before Congress in October of 1990, describing Iraqi soldiers pulling babies out of incubators in Kuwaiti hospitals and leaving them to die on the floor. She gave her name only as Nayirah, lawmakers cried. The story ran everywhere, 'cause nothing moves a room like a teenager describing dead babies. Sir, here's the part that took 2 full years to come out. Nayirah was the daughter of Kuwait's ambassador to the United States. Her testimony had been coached, 'cause the whole thing had been organized by a public relations firm working directly for the Kuwaiti government, with close ties to the Bush administration. A 1992 television investigation put it plainly, quote, "The story wasn't factual. Melvin, pull the receipts. Turns out the most emotionally devastating witness in the entire lead-up to the Gulf War was a coached teenager with a fake last name. 'Cause apparently that's just easier than finding a real one. Real Iraqi atrocities in Kuwait absolutely happened. That part isn't in dispute. But the single image that did the most to swing American opinion toward war was manufactured by a public relations firm from a script. McKinley had a newspaper mogul, Bush had an ad agency, and everything you've heard so far tonight, all of it, was just the warm-up. This next one isn't about one lie. It's about an entire war built on a claim we spent years insisting was true, right up until we finally went looking and found nothing there at all. On October 7, 2002, George W. Bush looked into a camera and told the country, quote, "We have found that the Iraqi regime possesses chemical and biological weapons." 5 months later, on March 20, 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. We did not find those weapons. Not then. Not ever. Sir, I need you to sit with that for a second, 'cause this isn't a maybe like Polk, or a probably like the Maine. This is a years-long government-wide case that collapsed after the fact. Here's how we got there. In October of 2002, the CIA released an intelligence estimate claiming Iraq had reconstituted its nuclear weapons program. 'Cause the evidence at the time seemed to include aluminum tubes purchased by Iraq. Tubes that turned out to be for rockets, not centrifuges. In January of 2003, Bush's State of the Union included 16 words that would define the entire war. The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa. Those 16 words were based on documents about a supposed Iraq-Niger uranium deal, documents that had already been forged. A former ambassador had personally traveled to Niger the year before and reported back that the story didn't hold up, 'cause he'd actually gone and checked. When his findings became public, his wife's identity as a covert CIA officer was leaked to the press in what looked a whole lot like retaliation. Melvin, pull the receipts, an entire war's worth of justification, and the guy who actually went and checked the facts got his own wife's cover blown for his trouble. Same playbook McKinley used with the newspapers, same one Bush 41 used with Naira. Just better production values this time. They call me Bird. Secret Bird. Sorry, sir, I've been waiting 200 years to use that one. Let me have it. The invasion followed on March 20th, 2003. And when inspectors finally got the access they needed to check everything, the final government report on the search, released in 2004, found no credible evidence of an active weapons program at all, 'cause there wasn't one to find. A secret British record of a 2002 meeting, later leaked to the press, quoted the head of British intelligence describing the process bluntly. The intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy, not the other way around. Sir, that's the whole scandal in 5 words. Facts fixed around a decision that was already made. Intelligence officials described their confidence in Iraq's weapons program using language normally reserved for something like confirming a missile launch in real time. That's how confidently wrong the entire case turned out to be. And here's the part that gets left out of a lot of retellings. The United Nations had inspectors on the ground in Iraq in the months right before the invasion, actively searching for these exact weapons. Their lead inspector reported back to the Security Council that his teams weren't finding what the intelligence reports claimed should be there. The invasion happened anyway, before that search had even run its course, 'cause waiting for inspectors to finish wasn't really compatible with a timeline that had already been decided. More than 4,500 American service members died in that war. Estimates of Iraqi civilian deaths run anywhere from 100,000 to well over 500,000, depending on which study you trust. And even the low end of that range is a small city's worth of people. All of it, built on weapons that, in the end, simply weren't there. Johnson lied about one confusing night on a fogged-up radar screen. This one lied, or was catastrophically wrong, or some mix of both, about an entire arsenal, for the better part of a year, in front of the entire world, and it took years and a full government investigation to admit it. I was there for that one, sir, and Eagle's honor. I have never seen a bigger gap between what a government said with total confidence and what actually turned out to be true. On January 3, 2020, a U.S. drone strike at Baghdad's airport killed Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani, the most senior Iranian military official killed by any country since the late 1980s. The stated reason, delivered by the Secretary of State himself, Soleimani was planning, quote, imminent attacks on American embassies and personnel. Sir, imminent is doing a lot of work in that sentence. A classified briefing is basically a closed-door version of the same argument made to the public, just with fewer follow-up questions allowed. Congress got one of those, pushing that same imminent threat justification. But the Pentagon's own defense secretary at the time later said in interviews that he personally never saw clear intelligence pointing to a specific imminent attack. 'Cause imminent and possible, someday, maybe, are not actually the same word, even if they get used interchangeably under pressure. A government watchdog agency reviewed the strike months later and concluded plainly that it hadn't complied with the law requiring Congress be consulted before this kind of military action, because the administration used its own authority as the justification instead of asking permission first. Melvin, pull the receipts one last time. Turns out even a defense secretary can be out of the loop on his own imminent threat. 'Cause apparently that's a phrase with a lot of flexibility built into it. Iran responded with a missile barrage on a U.S. base days later. More than 100 American service members were later diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries from that retaliation. No full-scale war followed this time, but the pattern held exactly the same shape it's held since 1798. Announce the threat with total confidence. Act first. Let the imminent part get quietly walked back later, once the news cycles moved on. Sir, 222 years. That's how long this playbook's been running, start to finish, and it hasn't needed a single update. Oh, and Melvin still hasn't found that Adams file. 200 years later. Some receipts just don't want to be pulled. I was there for every single one of these. And here's the pattern, plain and simple. History doesn't lie. Presidents do. But not all of them. Adams, the guy we started with tonight, had a cabinet begging him for exactly this kind of war, and he's the one president on this entire list who looked at it and said no. Next time, that's the whole video. Every president who had the perfect excuse for a war and walked away from it anyway. That's every US president who nearly started a war he resisted. Click it right there, and let's find out who else said no.